Okay. Okay. So when the chapter 2 was about the chemistry of love, and chapter 3 was about emotions, because love in this book is treated like an emotion. Chapter 4 then raises a question which is about emotions and particularly about love. And the question it raises, or defends, is that of whether an emotion can be rational or irrational. And that's the way we speak, because we say things like, you have fear of flying, and that's completely irrational because it's actually a lot more dangerous to drive a car, so that's irrational, you should get over it, or work on it, or not think about it. So it doesn't talk that way, as if emotions can be rational or irrational. Can you think of another kind of mental state that would be the kind of thing where we talk about it being sometimes rational or irrational? I mean, there can be more than one, but... Yeah?
I guess rational or irrational fears.
Right, that would still fall under emotion,
Oh,
so yeah. I was thinking about something completely different. Like, suppose I say, like, they're really aliens who are forcing us to stay here at UMSL and even teach in certain classes. What am I expressing if I say that, if I state it?
Conspiracy theories?
Yeah, conspiracy theories. But I'm expressing some mental state of mind, which is not necessarily an emotion. There might be emotions, there might be fears, and so on. Accompanying that, but what am I? Am I stating a desire? I hope, or I want it to be that way. Well, that could be the case too. But okay, let's go back to, if I say it's raining or the sun is shining. What am I stating? I'm stating a fact, but what kind of mental state would it be? What corresponds to that? I'm endorsing something. If I say it's not raining, I'm denying something. We call different things, but one thing it can be called is belief, right? You can also call it a judgment, maybe. Just a statement, an opinion. An opinion, that's something that goes way back to Plato. That was the word that was used in the translation of the ancient Greek. So an opinion, or a belief, or a judgment is something that I'm endorsing or denying. And beliefs, normally, those kinds of mental states can be rational or irrational. So that's something almost everyone would agree to. Right? So if I say 2 + 2 is 4, that seems really rational, right? So if I start talking about the aliens forcing us to be in here, or the other, if you do psychology, you get to look at very interesting cases like Capgras syndrome, where people believe that their family members are imposters. So someone actually adopted their real husband and put someone who's an exact copy in their place. And if you ask them, like, well, why don't you run away? Why do you keep sleeping with the person? They'll say, well, that my husband might be killed. And you ask them, but it looks exactly like your husband, right? They say, yes, that's exactly the point. It looks exactly like my husband. And so some of them have had 80 husbands, 80 replacements of their husbands. In some cases, it's so bad that they also think that they have been replaced. So when they look themselves in the mirror, they think that someone has replaced the real them, with a body at least, something like that. There are lots of books and novels about that. And the other cases, like this is one case that is heard about where this person went to the doctor and said that every night some aliens came and they actually stole blood from her body every night. And then she pointed to some freckles and said, see, that's where they made an incision last time. And here's another one they made an incision last time for that. And then the doctor's like, oh, you mean the freckles? Look, I have those too. See? They're called freckles. And she said, no, no, no. I know they look like freckles, but they're not freckles. These are incisions where people actually steal my blood at night. So these are, some people would call them beliefs, but of course, highly irrational beliefs or delusions, right? And so that's pretty common, pretty standard. But the way we speak, emotions too can be rational and irrational. And so fear, as you mentioned, can be rational or irrational. Fear of flying, right? Or just fear phobias. Right? So it may be that fear of spiders, a warned if you were somewhere in Australia with some really dangerous spider that's sitting right in front of you. But if it's not in brown recluse, then in St. Louis, most of the time, fear of spiders would be irrational, and so on for most of the other emotions. There might be cases where you're grieving. Grieving usually, given if you actually had a loss, that doesn't have to be a death. That can also be a loss of a job or a loss of a friendship, loss of a relationship, loss of a house, so on. You can be grieving that. Of course, if you didn't lose it, then your grieving would be irrational, right? Because then you point out to you say, well, you keep grieving the loss of your house, and then you say, we point out, well, but you still have your house, right? In that case, it would be irrational, again, delusional. But they can also be irrational in a different sense. So grief, for instance, that becomes complicated grief, meaning it goes on and on and on for way longer than grief normally goes on for, can be irrational because, it doesn't quite fit. It's complicated to define what makes an emotion irrational, but it doesn't fit sort of the expected time frame or the stages of grieving and so on. And then when we go to love, then love can be irrational as well. And so that whole chapter is a lot about that. Some of it is more complicated than other of the stuff. The more complicated stuff is that we get into the debate about that development about love and some more emotion, but also Kolotny, where love is rational if it has good history, or history actually. Then it gets a little bit more complicated. But there are two ways I think that an emotion, and we could just take love, can be irrational. Let's take fear. Fear is an easy example. So, if you fear something, then it can be irrational because that isn't a thing, right? So, you see that in kids. So, almost all kids are afraid of monsters at some point in their lives. And there aren't any monsters, so their fear is irrational. That doesn't mean it couldn't be sort of coherent inside their own mind, just like the person who thought that she got her blood stolen. In her own mind, that was coherent, right? She had good answers to every question the doctor would ask her. But if there aren't monsters and you fear monsters, then that's one way that your fear can be irrational, right? And then there's another way, which might be more common for adults, that you fear something that's actually there, so flying, for instance. But in this case, the fear is not warranted, right? Why is it not warranted? Because fear sort of ought to be attached to something that is that's dangerous or is a threat to you. So if flying is a very, very minimal threat to you, then your fear is not warranted in that case, and so it's irrational. So love, of course, let's focus on romantic love, including obsessions and also obsessions after breakups and so on. So then it becomes more complicated. Now, you could be in love or love someone or something that isn't there. I suppose that sometimes happens in grief cases, so people who lose a person sometimes go back and forth about denying that it happened. And so their love in that case might be irrational. It may not be irrational to love someone who is dead in a different sense, in a more transferred sense where what you loved is more like you loved the person, and so we sometimes say we still love the person if the person is dead, but well knowing that the person is dead. So that's not the case I'm talking about. I'm talking about a case where, say, a person denies during grief that a person is dead, and so believes the person is alive, and so loves that person. Maybe even makes dinners for that person because they believe the person is alive. So that would be irrational love. But so that would be, that's a more rare case of irrational love. So a more common case of irrational love would be a case where love, you have this love, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the person. So when we talk about fear, for instance, I mean, if you're out, if one of your ancestors were out in the I don't know what these animals live in the rainforest, and the tiger in front of them, and they were fearing this tiger. The tiger's really there. The tiger really is a threat to their lives, or even to just their well-being. The fear is perfectly rational. But what is the relation then to the person? What should the person be? Well, that's what's really hard to say. But we can say that there are cases that are pretty obvious, so we can start there, right? So if you were in a relationship with a person who's beating you up every day, or who's emotionally abusing you every day, or verbally abusing you every day, calling you names, and so on, but emotionally you really love that person. It's not to deny you don't. This is not about whether you love or not. This is about whether it's rational to do it. In that case, it's a clear case where it's irrational to love the person. So yes, that is a person, but it's still irrational because the relation, right? So the love doesn't fit that object. Just like when we had the fear case, the fear of flying doesn't fit the flying, whereas in the rainforest, the fear of the tiger does fit the danger of the tiger. So the idea here is that someone should be lovable for love of them to be rational. And that sounds circular, but it also is actually when we talk about the other emotions, because we're talking about something being a threat. We have almost said, well, something is a threat to you, yes, you should either run or fight, right? And so that's sort of a way of fearing, or a way of reacting to fear. The person should be lovable, and then of course it becomes difficult to say what counts as lovable. And it's much more easy to say what does it count as lovable, right? So it's easy to point to all these cases where, no, these cases are not cases of a person that's lovable. I just want to say I think you had a hand, right?
Yeah, I had a question about something you said. So you mentioned that if a person loves another person, let's say they're in a relationship, and that other person is maybe emotionally or verbally abusive, that person loves that other person. Is it a rational